Hello everyone and welcome to my newest video, which is going to be about the concept of the synthetic a priori as a term in epistemology, metaphysics, or philosophy more generally. And I'm going to be offering kind of critical or skeptical view of its prospects of holding up as a plausible candidate for what kinds of knowledge are achievable or attainable by us as humans, or pretty much by any finite thinker, any finite limited rational being. Uh, so the synthetic a priori is a philosophical term of art. So it is part of philosophy's technical vocabulary, technical terminology. But even though it may sound a little bit obscure or impenetrable, I will try to offer explanation that will be accessible to even those who do not have too much background in philosophy or academic philosophy, formally or non-formally, doesn't really matter that much. Uh, so first of all, I'm going to show you what that is supposed to mean, static a priori, what that is even supposed to mean. Uh, the term itself pretty much comes from Kant, or at least Kant is the first one who problematized that kind of concept explicitly, even though the a priori and a posteriori type of terminology was used by Hume also, for example, even though perhaps even some much earlier authors, but Hume, for example, talks about the a priori. Uh, it's pretty much a Latin phrase, but it means in epistemology, it means knowledge that is attained without recourse to experience or independently of experience. So, what the analytic, what the a priori knowledge is supposed to be is some kind of knowledge that we can attain without recourse to any particular empirical observation uh, or empirical experience. So, Hume, for that matter, would say that all a priori knowledge is analytic, which pretty much makes him a rational. I'm sorry, it makes him an empiricist, which makes him an empiricist in that principle way, where we cannot, without recourse to experience, without recourse to empirical observation, sense perception, we cannot attain any kind of substantive knowledge about the world. We cannot attain any kind of informative knowledge about the world. We can only attain analytic propositions or analytic truths or analytic knowledge, which pretty much boils down to tautologies. And if you don't know what tautologies are, those are propositions or truths that pretty much are true by virtue of the meaning of the constituent terms. So things like the most common example, I don't need to be too imaginative here, but the most common example are all bachelors are unmarried men. So unmarried human males, if you wish. Uh, so that is a common example of an analytic proposition, which states that, which pretty much can be, its truth can be uh, cognized simply by analyzing. That's why they call it analytics. Simply by analyzing uh, the constituent terms of the sentence, of the statement, of the proposition. So it is part of the meaning, or it maybe is the whole meaning of bachelor to be an unmarried man. So say someone is bachelor and infer from that that he is an unmarried man. That is not really an informative judgment. That doesn't really give us any kind of new knowledge about the world. It simply explicates our implicit meaning of those terms. So we do not. That's why it's analytic. But why is it a priori? Because we do not have to go into the world and maybe check if our neighbors are married or if they're men, for example, to find out that all bachelors are unmarried men. They're pretty much true by definition. So that is not really that problematic. or maybe it will be problematic with people like Quine, who problematize the whole notion of analyticity in his two dogmas of empiricism, his article Two Dogmas of Empiricism. But I will not go too deep. I will not go into that really here. Uh, I will at least take that kind of notion of analyticity as unproblematic for the sake of this video, for the sake of argument. Uh, what is problematic in the discussions between rationalism and empiricism is the status of the synthetic a priori propositions. So analytic a priori propositions, which are like a equals a, or 2 plus 2 equals 4, or all bachelors are unmarried men, those will be unproblematic. And also synthetic a posteriori propositions, so knowledge about the world that is attained through sense experience, would also be unproblematic in that sense, which is like, I don't know, my phone is black, for instance. I just looked at the phone and I realized that it is black. So that is not really that problematic in these discussions of the synthetic a priori or metaphysics in general or epistemology in general. What is problematic is the status of the synthetic a priori propositions, because the synthetic a priori propositions are supposed to give us some kind of knowledge about the world, not just knowledge of our own concepts, not just knowledge of our own words and their meanings, but also knowledge that relates to the world, that says something true and substantive and informative about the world, without recourse to experience. So how can we reach, or can we at all reach, knowledge about the world without recourse to sense experience? That is the whole problem of the synthetic a priori. I would say the whole problem of metaphysics more generally. I would extend that kind of talk even further than it was perhaps traditionally done. So that kind of seems, perhaps it seems to you counterintuitive that we can gain substantive knowledge about the world without recourse, without appeal to sense experience. So what other methods, what other devices or faculties do we have to gain knowledge about the world other than our sense faculties? So some philosophers would say that we, by a priori analysis or intuition or ratiocination, contemplation, or whatever other term we want to use, we can actually come at some substantive truths about the world. And that is at least Kant's view of traditional metaphysics, much of traditional metaphysics, and that is what he's trying to criticize. That is what he's trying to pretty much critically limit. He's trying to show us the limits of our cognitive faculties, cognitive abilities, and to show that much of what we thought was possible to attain in terms of knowledge is not really possible to attain, and we should actually limit our claims to knowledge to what we can actually attain in reality. So that is how he has limited. That is pretty much the meaning of his critical project, turn against traditional metaphysics in a certain sense, and to show the actual and principal limitations of our minds, of our knowledge faculties, of our cognitive faculties. So, in that sense, Kant was inspired by Hume, because Hume's empiricist principles led him to a certain sort of skepticism about many things, about causality, about induction, about the notion of substance, about the notion of personal identity, and so on. But Kant wanted to save science. Kant wanted to save science. Kant wanted to save knowledge, human knowledge, from the threats of skepticism, from the imminent threats of skepticism. And that's why, even though he went along with Hume a certain part of the way, a good part of the way, he went along with Hume. but he also went against Hume in another sense, where he said that uh, we can gain synthetic a priori knowledge. Kant would say is not exactly what the school metaphysics or scholastic, not scholastic, but school metaphysics of Leibniz and Wolff want to say we can achieve. So the knowledge of God, the knowledge of the eternal soul, the knowledge of objects in general, the knowledge of the world as a whole, and the knowledge of the freedom of the will. Those are the main topics of metaphysics that Kant wanted to uh, criticize. Right? Kant wanted to limit our access to, not limit in some volitional way, but simply to point out that we cannot really know those things in the way that some people have thought we can. Uh, but where Kant wanted to save the synthetic a priori knowledge was basically, as far as I can see, in three main areas. Uh, so it was the area of physics or science in general, natural science, and also the area of mathematics as some kind of special discipline, as well as metaphysics, but in some very qualified sense of metaphysics. It was not traditional metaphysics, but it was his kind of transcendental type of metaphysics. So Kant would say, as we can see here in this standard Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry, uh, throughout the analytic, throughout the transcendental analytic, Kant elaborates on this general view, uh, noting that transcendental employment of understanding, which aims at towards knowledge of things independently of experience, and thus knowledge of noumena or things in themselves, is illicit or impermissible. It is in this connection that Kant famously, in the Analytics, said that the proud name of ontology, which presumes to offer synthetic a priori recognitions of things in general, must give way to the more modest title of transcendental analytic. So, as far as I can see, what he means by that is that we should limit our pretensions to the knowledge of the world a priori, in a priori way, to knowledge of noumena or things in themselves, or the world as it is in itself, independently of how we see it or how we experience it or how it appears to us. We should limit those pretensions. Actually, we should eliminate those pretensions pretty much. And we should we should limit ourselves to the knowledge about things as they appear to us, things of knowledge of phenomena, not noumena. Uh, but what he means by the transcendental analytic, what he means by metaphysics in that qualified sense, is as Nikolai Hartmann has noted uh, in his book, the how would I translate it? The general outlines of a metaphysics of knowledge, or something like that. Uh, Metaphysics of knowledge. That is a very important concept because it's not necessarily metaphysics of the world as it is in itself, or not knowledge of the world as it is in itself, but it is knowledge of the necessary conditions for the possibility of any knowledge of the world. So that is kind of a critical turn, or the Copernican revolution, if you want, where Kant turns our aims against trying to come at some kind of completely objective reality, absolute reality, and wants to analyze our knowledge faculties, wants to see what kind of knowledge is possible for us and what kind of knowledge isn't possible for us. So in that sense, metaphysics would pretty much turn to epistemology. You know, it will become epistemology. It will be transformed into epistemology, or the theory of knowledge. Uh, but Kant has a kind of transcendental argument for those kinds of things, which pretty much assumes uh, what needs to be true about reality for that to be true, right? The transcendental arguments are the arguments from the necessary conditions for the possibility of something, and that something's being true to the truth of those necessary uh, conditions, if that's clear even. But transcendental arguments want to go from what is observed and what needs to be true for that what is observed to be true to the truth of what that thing which is its necessary condition. So that's pretty much the general form of the transcendental arguments. Uh, so that's how Kant will argue for his transcendental idealism, for instance. But what I want to show here, what I want to share here, uh, let me see. Okay, something more about Kant. So, right. So Hume attacked the notion of causality. Some kind of causality is supposed to be some kind of necessary connection that holds between different kinds of events in the world. And Hume asked the question: how are we supposed to know that there is a necessary connection, necessary causal connection between different events in the world? Because empirically speaking, all we can actually observe with our senses is not the causal connection, but is merely the succession or the constant conjunction of different events in the world. We can observe one event following another event, or one event preceding another event, right? But we cannot really observe any kind of necessary connection between them. And that is what Hume says is an addition of our internal minds. It is an addition of our faculty of habit, because by habit and by induction, by extrapolation from our previous experiences, we infer that future future experiences will resemble our past experiences, or we actually assume the uniformity of nature across time and space. We assume that nature works in uniform ways, in homogeneous ways, uh, across time and space universally. Uh, and that is how we get to those conclusions, which Hume would say were actually ultimately unjustified, but maybe practically justified or practically useful in dealing with the world. But in our more philosophical moments, in our more philosophical moods, we cannot really have that kind of secure knowledge about causal connections. So what Kant would say, Kant would agree with Hume uh, in the sense that uh, in the sense that yes, the concepts of causality pretty much come from our own minds. But Kant would take that further than Hume, and Kant would say that our minds are basically, how would I put it? They are the loci or loci, the plural of locus, loci or loci. I'm not sure. So there's some kind of basis. There's some kind of ground for the empirical world as such. So that is his empirical realism, and that is his transcendental idealism, all in one. So our minds are not merely external observers of empirical reality, but in some sense they are the creators of empirical reality, or at least they are the informers of empirical reality, because the categories that come pretty much innately or inbornly within our minds, within our understanding, uh, shape the world as we experience it. They do not shape the world as it is in itself, but they shape our experience of the world, which is pretty much the empirical world. In other words, I think uh, I think Kant, yeah, Kant is an idealist in that sense. but he's not an empirical idealist. That is still kind of a mysterious to me, but I think that Kant oversteps some of his warrants when he says that knowledge of our own minds innately gives us some kind of warrant for inference about the empirical world. He will limit himself. He doesn't say it's a noumenal world, but gives us knowledge of the empirical world in some a priori way, which is pretty much the basis, the foundation of natural science, and also mathematics, right? So he wants to save science and mathematics from the skeptical attacks of Hume by pretty much stipulating that our categories are veridical, our categories are trustworthy indicators of what the world is like in some real sense. Uh, because if we went along with Hume all the way, we, science, in a certain sense, will lose its legitimacy. At least it will lose its unqualified basis for our trust or our confidence. So yeah, in a certain sense, what Kant talks about under causality has two basic aspects. So there's the general truth about the notion of causality. I would say it's not really about objective causality, but the very notion of causality, which says that all effects have causes. But that is an analytic statement, and Kant would agree with that, right? It is in the very concept of effect that it has a cause. Because if it didn't have a cause, it wouldn't be an effect. Uh, that is kind of unproblematic. But Kant, from that, also wants to deduce the synthetic, what is according to him the synthetic a priori statement, that every event necessarily has a cause, as it says here. So this analytic proposition is can be contrasted with the synthetic one, that every event necessarily has a cause, which in turn can be read in two ways: that every event necessarily has just some cause, right? Uh, or that the same causes necessarily bring about the same effects. Now uh, we can argue about whether these are really synthetic a priori, and if they are, we can argue about whether we can actually be warranted about asserting them. Uh, but even if we grant those, right? How do we get to the vast myriad of empirical causal laws that we think we can arrive at by science, by experience, by sense perception, by observation, by induction? For example, if I say that if I press this button on my phone, uh, it will uh, it will unlock, for instance, right? So that is a general, relatively general, I mean, relatively specific, but still general, uh, causal, causal. Well, it's an assumption according to me, but it's a causal, some kind of causal law that we're supposed to uncover by the many repeated experiences of me clicking this button and my phone unlocking. But our statements of causality, or the statements of the necessary connections between different types of events, does not just state that every single past time I click this button on my phone and unlocked, but also says that every other time that I click this phone on my button, at least the phone is working properly, uh, it will also unlock, right? So there is some kind of supposed to be a universal statement, universal truth, and a necessary connection between those two different types of events in the world. So that is problematic according to me, and I think also according to Hume. But I don't see how Kant would wish to deduce all of those different causal laws. It's just a simple example, trivial example of a causal law. But even within science, pretty much what science is generally trying to do is attain the knowledge of causal laws or the necessary universal laws that exist within nature. That is pretty much the goal of science, at least when understood in a kind of what I would say is a naive, sort of realistic way. Uh, but I'm not sure how Kant would want to deduce all of those different laws of causality, all those different, relatively particular laws of causality, relatively specific laws of causality, from the general statement that every event has a cause or whatever, even if that is a synthetic a priori truth. Uh, because yeah, he has those general causal causal laws, if they're causal laws at all. They're just the it's pretty much the content of the very concept of causality that he's explicating there ultimately. But even if that were true, uh, to gauge the truth of, I don't know, if I press this button on my phone will unlock, I would need to have some kind of recourse to experience, right? But even that kind of recourse to experience, my past experiences, past repeated experiences, however many times it has repeated, plus those general causal laws, those static a priori causal laws, even when we combine those, so the past experiences and the general truths about causality, I'm not sure how we can actually deduce that, because in the realm of experience, all we have are constant conjunction, again, as Hume said, right? Uh, where I think Kant again is a naive realist is in saying that our concepts, even if they come with inherently within our experience, so the categories of understanding, even if in that sometimes come inherently under experience, even though I think that is problematic too. Uh, Even if that were true, uh, how would we? Wait a second. Let me give me a minute. Uh, Yes. So even if those concepts or some kind of conceptual structure comes inherently within experience, within sense perception, uh, why do we conclude that that conceptual structure belongs to the world itself and not simply our own minds? I mean, Kant did say it belongs to our minds, but he wants to extend that and said that it belongs to the world as presented to our minds. But I'm not sure he sees the implications of these, because I think the implications of these are Humean ultimately, or skeptical, if you want, because those are just the contributions of our own minds. Those are not really objectively valid. He wants to say that that causal structure, those categories, those causal relations are objectively valid. They are true of the world of phenomena, which is not simply some kind of thought up world or some kind of imaginary illusory world, but it is the real world, right? In some real sense. Uh, yeah, so that's how I think Kant is not critical enough, I would say. But let me look at this article that I found here on JSTOR. I found it on JSTOR. So pretty much, this is an article. Let me see, by Oliver A. Johnson, "Denial of the Synthetic A Priori." So in that article, he pretty much analyzes the very concept, tries to define the very concept of the synthetic a priori in some way that would be relatively uncontroversial, that most authors would agree to. And then he tries to show that the very statement that there are no synthetic a priori truths is a synthetic a priori truth. So in that sense, it is self-defeating to claim that there are no synthetic a priori truths. So I'm not going to go over his full argument. It's not really necessary right now. But I still think this is a sort of a surface level analysis because okay, let's grant the author his assumption, and let's say that yes, that there are no synthetic a priori truths is a synthetic a priori truth. Yet that is in a certain sense self-refuting, self-contradictory. But that by itself doesn't really show that any of the other supposed synthetic a priori truths are really synthetic a priori truths. Any of the substance of what we actually want to argue for, not just that very principled position that there are or there aren't synthetic a priori truths. So I made some notes here on my phone. So yeah, uh, I made some notes about this article or my comments on it. So I would say that the concept, if we say we have some kind of knowledge, at least propositional knowledge, at least knowledge that can be expressed in terms of assertoric statements, declarative, indicative statements, in language. All that kind of knowledge depends, in part, we must agree, I think, on our language, right? But our language is sort of not really strictly a reflection of how things objectively are or how things objectively stand. But it's our own way of making sense of things, to put it very generally, very kind of in a sort of maybe even common sense way. Uh, so words are arbitrary and culturally contingent. I think many of us would agree, even though of course, we can dispute that. But uh, so let's say words are arbitrary, culturally contingent. So of course, different cultures, even different people within the same culture, have different words for what is pretty much the same thing. Mm, so, but concepts. So we say that that kind of puts a big doubt, big question mark on our attempts to get at synthetic a priori knowledge because we cannot have recourse to experience. We can only have synthetic a priori knowledge pretty much by analysis or by insight into our words and concepts because we're not allowed to look at sense experience. We can only look at words and concepts. Uh, so then we can say in defense of that kind of concept of synthetic a priori or the possibility of synthetic a priori that concepts are not in the same sense arbitrary and culturally contingent because the concepts are not necessarily reducible to words. Concepts are more like thought structures or thought contents or uh, some kind of mental entity, conceptual, intellectual entity that is not reducible to culturally contingent words. It has a meaning that can be expressed in words, but can be expressed in different words, right? So that's how it's not really reducible to the words, bare words themselves. So concepts are universal and necessary, uh, and that is how we may want to defend uh, that kind of conception of static a priori. But I think that assumes that the world still assumes that concepts are something objective. The concept not merely some kind of I wouldn't say the figment of our imagination. Like that would be the other extreme, right? That would be the extreme of total anti-realism, skepticism, relativism, whatever. Uh, but still, I think, I mean, I'm sorry if this sounds offensive, but I may even use it as a technical term, as it is sometimes used in philosophy. I would say that kind of conception is naive, or that kind of conception is uncritical. That kind of conception is immediate and oh my God, I will want to say, if I'm even allowed to say brute in a certain sense, or primitive, because it's a naive reification of our mental categories to the categories of the world itself. And our concepts, even if they are not reducible to words, they're still, our ways of thinking, uh, which are partly, at least partly independent of words. Okay, we can agree to that, but not maybe not wholly independent of words or language. But that kind of conception assumes that, our conceptual understanding uh, has some kind of real referent or real equivalent or real analog in the objective world, or that there can be a one-to-one correspondence between our concepts and things as they stand in the world. But that itself assumes that the world has a conceptual structure that wants to reify concepts, so to think of concepts as not merely our thoughts or words, but also parts or constituents of objective reality. And I think that is pretty much Platonism. I would trace that back, of course, to Plato. Maybe even Socrates. In Socrates, we can find some kind of some kind of predecessor to that, of course. But uh, yeah, that goes through a lot of Western philosophy, even Eastern philosophy, in its more realistic strains. Uh, yes, that is an assumption that we can at least doubt. We can at least question. We don't have to assume dogmatically and merely by posit. So we must, in some sense, justify if we want to defend it rationally. So yeah, I have some more notes here, but they're not really as relevant to this discussion. So I hope this has been understandable, interesting, informative, enjoyable. So I will pretty much stop at this point. I don't know what else to say. Uh, and yeah, if you like this kind of content, I urge you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can also follow me on Facebook, on Instagram, on WordPress, whatever other platforms you're using. And also would like to propose that if you enjoy this kind of content as well as what I'm sharing quite often actually and quite regularly on other social media platforms and blogs and whatnot. Also, I'm also the Substack Medium and whatnot. If you enjoy and find some kind of value in this content, you can also try supporting me financially via my PayPal account, which I will post the link to in the description. Uh, which would mean actually a significant amount to me. Uh, so yes, I will stop at this point, and I hope to see you at some other installment on my channel. Okay, bye for now.